he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. This is Ministry of the Badge.
Ezra Levant for Rebel News. I'm outside a Christian church in Majorville, New Brunswick, that was torched yesterday. As you can see, the front door is boarded up. Sunday service is completely scorched. I'll have a full report from my visit here tomorrow. This is just the latest in a 10-year-long anti-Christian crime wave that has been fomented by anti-Christian politicians and ignored by anti-Christian journalists. I'll have my full report tomorrow.
Case because it's a really egregious example of what happens when a society, when a culture, and when a government sheds and rejects its Christian heritage, which has been happening for a long time in Great Britain, as we discussed here before. The specific story is about a church, a little community Christian church in Essex. And for about 6 years now, the pastor and the congregation of this little church go out every week into the town square, and they set up a little booth with pamphlets, and they sing songs, and they preach, and they pray with people, and they have a sign saying, you know, Jesus is Lord. And they've done so for years without incident. Well, last year, the town council began harassing them, threatening them with fines for using amplification, even though that's allowed, and other groups do that. And just this past week, they hit them with a criminal notice that not only were they in violation of the rules for their amplification, which they weren't, but also the content of what they were preaching. And specifically, this criminal complaint called out that they were preaching about hell, about judgment, about salvation. Essentially, they were preaching what is considered to be traditional Christian doctrine.
You know, when it comes to government and when it comes to the police, and you hear all this talk recently about how oppressive the English government has become and the Canadian government is becoming regarding Christianity, take a look at what the Bible says. Way back when Israel was let go out of Egypt, obviously they had been in bondage for hundreds of years. Joseph, if you remember the story of Joseph, he went there, he ran Egypt for quite some time, and then eventually they became enslaved by the Egyptians. Joseph was part of that government years before, under the rule of the pharaohs. And after all those years, the Israelites became enslaved. Well, when they left, God had set aside for them a place where he was going to make it their land. And it's the land that is eventually called Israel. Some will argue it's the same land of today. Some will argue that no, it's not the same land, that there's more to it, and so on and so forth. I believe that the Israel that we see now was the Israel of the Bible. Are there different places that, of course, but the same cities are there? Is the landmass maybe a little bit different? Sure. But we're not going to get into all that. We're going to get into the fact that there were laws concerning kings, and that comes from Deuteronomy. And when you look at Deuteronomy, God clearly indicates that there was going to be a kingdom set up. And he lays out for the people what government is supposed to be, according to his word and his laws. But what they ended up with wasn't that. Now, he sets a standard and he gives us free will and free practice. So we pretty much get the government we want, and it's proven right here in these passages. Let's take a look at Deuteronomy and what it says. Laws concerning kings. When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, this is in Deuteronomy again 17, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me. You may indeed set a king over you, when the Lord your God will choose one. From coming among your brothers, you shall set a king over you. You may not put it a foreigner over you, and who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again, and he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire to himself excessive silver and gold. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of the law approved by the Levitical priests, and it shall be with him, and he shall read it in all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandments, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. Now it's clear God sets a standard for a king and for what he wants his people to be governed by. And if you notice, it's a standard that obviously wasn't lived up to by any of the kings of Israel. But it was God's perfect standard that was to be set for government. A government who served the people, not themselves. A king who was going to be a servant to the people and not to himself. So we are set here in the United States of America and in a lot of other places by the government, and the government is elected by us as the people. In America, the people are king, and they elect representatives, and one particular representative in the president, in the governor, in a sheriff of a county. So if the people who are king elect a representative who starts to get out of hand, who starts to take things into their own accounts and goes against God, goes against the Bible, and goes against all of those, isn't that just a reflection of the people? Government, government, government. Oh, it's government's fault. It's government's fault. Well, we know who these people are when we elect them. And if you're not paying attention, then shame on you. So when you see oppressive governments happen and you see all of the anti-God and anti-religion that goes on in a lot of these governments that you're seeing, and it's more anti-Christianity, let's face it. That's exactly what it is. Well, way back when, God sets up a standard. And it wasn't going to be a standard that was going to be set by any man, because no man could live up to that standard. Only Jesus, the King, is ever going to live up to that standard. That's how he intended it. So what happens? What happens to God's people? What happens to the Christians? What happens to those who, when you go away from the teachings of the Bible, when you go away and you go after the teachings of the Bible because you want to become more inclusive for whatever reason, and your police, as you say, become oppressive, and now the cops are torn between enforcing some laws that are just crazy, that you're arresting pastors for preaching on street corners, and you pass laws that could get you in trouble for reading Bible passages and you're going to use your police to do such things, what happened there? What happened there? When it's clear that way back in Deuteronomy, God sets the standards for kings and sets the standards for the king that he wants people to have, and especially his own people. Romans 13 is clear on where government comes from. It's from God. And the perfect standard is set in Deuteronomy. But because of our free will, and because we are in different societies that have different ways of electing governments and so on and so forth, should we not try to find some semblance of what God set as a standard? A government that isn't selfish to itself, that is representative of the people? The United States of America was an experiment unlike any other nation ever. And it's clear that our founding fathers, when you go back and you look at the books that they had written on our Constitution and the way we set up our police, so on and so forth, borrowed from all these different places, it was clear that it was a government by, for the people. And we are still a representative government, but you're watching all these different forms of government start to appear that are more and more anti-Christian. And it can be traced back to the hearts of the people themselves. Israel had a standard set for them. Now take a look at Samuel. When you look at Samuel and you see what it says in Samuel, I'm putting my cheaters for this one. And it came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, behold, these are all the leaders now from Israel. This Israel has gone on for a while. They have their kingdom. Behold, you're old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. You see, they didn't want the perfect king. Oh, no. They wanted the king like all the rest of the people. So the hearts of the people turned. But they have rejected me from being king over them, according to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So they are also doing to you. Now then, obey their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, these will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers, and he will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and to give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkey and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer that day. But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, but there shall be a king over us, that we may be also like all the nations, that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And when Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, obey their voice and make them a king. Samuel then said to the men of Israel, go, every man to his city. So the heart of the people turned against God, and they want to be led like all the other nations. They want to be inclusive, right? They want to have an inclusivity. See, it's not good enough to follow God's commands. Oh, no, 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 no. It's not good enough to have God lord over them. No, 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 no. No, we need like everybody else has. Isn't it only right to be inclusive? Isn't it only right to include all these things? Shouldn't you give rights over the certain things? Shouldn't everybody live free to how they want? Yeah, that's exactly what they're saying. To judge us. So they got the king they wanted. Is it then not true for all the nations that we see now? On this program, I talk about police and how they're ministers of God for good, because it says in Romans 13. But what happens if your government is starting to turn bad? Is the law that they create now the good that you are to enforce? Doesn't make sense, does it? So it's clear in this state of the world that we live in now, and those of us who understand the Bible and study it more and more people are saying we're towards the end of time. What end of time? The end of what we know as time. All of us are coming to an end. We're all going to die. That's true. But when you're starting to see these oppressive governments and more, start to pay attention to what the people of Israel did way back then. See how their hearts changed? You see how they wanted to get away from the tenets of God that were set way back for them in Deuteronomy that was supposed to be the king? And those of us who live by the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords live in a world where we're not to just stand by and watch all this stuff happen. We are to go out and try to get leaders in place of our government because we still hang on to the tenets of what God has said. A people and a representative of the people that pays attention and knows that they are put in there by God. But the problem is now you have a lot of godless leaders who want to do the will of themselves. And Israel's first king in Saul did for themselves. And you saw the whole list. Think about what's happened over a period of time now. And some could say, well, Brian, that was for Israel. That was in the Old Testament. No, God set a standard for his people. This nation was founded on biblical principles. Some will say this nation was founded on Judeo-biblical principles. What's happened? What's happened? So when you're complaining about what you see as an oppressive government, and we're fighting against cops and fighting against all these people, when you're complaining of those awful policies that are happening, take a look at the heart of the people who are nominating and putting these representatives in place. Word of warning. It's only going to get worse. If you have an opportunity now to change who is in your representative government, people who understand biblical principles, not quote unquote good men or women, people who understand biblical principles, those are the people you should be putting in. Why? Because unless you do, the freedom to be able to worship God is going to be in trouble. People talk about gun rights and so on and so forth. Just look at our neighbors next door to the north. It goes beyond that. You're getting to biblical principles that are no longer to be able to be practiced. It's the heart of the people. If you're going to assist suicide, like they do to our neighbors to the north and in some states here, if you're going to abort babies, if you're going to praise fatherlessness, if you're going to simply give to not widows but to single mothers so they could raise their children on their own accord, sleep around and have as many babies as they want to, if you're going to go that route and you're going to elect governments who think it's their job to enslave you, because that's exactly what happened, then that's what you're going to end up with. And it's going to get to a point, and it has come to somewhat of that, where the people of God are going to stand and say, you know what? I can't serve this anymore. It's better to serve God than it is to serve man. It's coming to that. It's coming to that. And those of you who are cops in areas where it's becoming more and more government-like, you're going to have to make a decision. And I said all along, it's your job. You can't fight against what your bosses say or do whatever, but there's nothing to say that you can't move to another department. And it's a tough position to be in. And it's going to get tougher and tougher until the people of God step up and start paying attention and start electing officials who understand biblical principles instead of every other whim that comes along in man's heart. But you can only be upset at yourselves. You can only be upset at for those who don't go out and vote. Not trying to make this so political, but in a way, I'm just trying to say you are here in the United States of America. You have a chance to have a government that follows biblical principles. No one is ever going to be perfect as long as we're on this earth. When Christ comes back, everything will be as it should be, as it was said in Deuteronomy. But until that happens, for the next how many ever years we're here, those of us who serve the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords in the different areas of our lives, in the different states and parts of the counties that we're in, can make a difference to make sure that we hold those in office responsible and to praise and pray for our officers and those who serve us, because they've been put in place by God. And if they become oppressive, take a look at our own hearts. In our pledge, it says, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If you want it that way, then you must hold leaders to that standard. For those of you who are wearing the badge, I strongly urge you to become a servant of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, Christ Jesus. Next week, I'm going to try to do a live version on YouTube. I've never done one before. So next week, I'm going to be on there. I'm going to try between 3 and 6 p.m. Central Time, somewhere in that time frame. So if you want, stay tuned. I'll take some of your questions. I'd like to interact with you. I've never done a live before, so I'm going to give it a shot. So I'm looking forward to that. Again, just wanted to stop by and talk about this topic because I've been seeing way too much on oppressive governments. See you live next week.
For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. You've been listening to Ministry of the Badge.